and so that I can move forward with Facebook Live. Which is my first time. I'm a Facebook Live virgin. Which I don't ever want to say again on a recording. What was I thinking?
Ah, you're a genius. You figured it out.
I'm not sure if I'm a genius. I feel like I know how to read instructions. That's what I know. Good morning, Darvel. All right. Arthur, you can let me know whether or not your family has figured that out and if it's working for everybody. The Facebook Live.
I just told them it's live now, so.
Perfect. All right. Patrick, when you're done your water.
Wonderful. My name is Patrick McDougall, and I'm joining as the moderator for today's Stimulus Connect. Bienvenue à tout le monde. I'm going to pass it over to Sophie, who is doing a simultaneous interpretation of today's Stimulus Connect, and she can explain how that works. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Patrick. Hello, everyone. I'll start in French and then repeat in English. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Comme à l'habitude, je suis ici pour offrir l'interprétation simultanée du webinaire. Je le fais par écrit. Alors, vous pouvez accéder à l'interprétation en cliquant sur CC ou sous-titres en bas de votre écran si vous êtes sur un ordinateur. Ça va vous permettre de voir les sous-titres affichés en bas de l'écran. On vous recommande aussi d'ouvrir la fenêtre affichée transcription intégrale. Puis comme ça, vous allez pouvoir suivre à la fois avec les sous-titres et la transcription qui affiche tout le texte dans sa version complète. Si vous êtes sur une tablette ou un téléphone, vous allez devoir activer le sous-titrage dans vos paramètres et l'orientation ou la taille de votre tablette ou de votre téléphone pourrait influencer les sous-titres. Alors, vous aurez peut-être à la tourner à l'horizontale pour faciliter la lecture. Si vous voulez poser des questions en français, vous pouvez le faire via le Q&R conversé ou même à l'oral s'il y a cette possibilité-là. On a des personnes bilingues ici en appui technique, alors vous pouvez participer dans la langue de votre choix. Bonne rencontre! And for the Anglophones, I'm offering simultaneous interpretation. So if you want to access the interpretation, it's done in written form. You can do so by clicking on closed captioning at the bottom of the screen if you're on your computer. And this will allow you to activate the closed captions. We also recommend that you open the full transcription window as well so you can see the full text. If you're on a mobile device, you'll have to activate the closed captioning in your settings, and the orientation of and the size of your screen might influence what you see. So you might have to flip your device horizontally to see the closed captioning. And everyone is invited to ask questions or participate in the language of their choice. We have a lot of bilingual help on board, so everyone can participate in the language of their choice. So on that note, have a great meeting. Merci.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks very much, Sophie. I want to start by acknowledging that where I am speaking from today in Vancouver, British Columbia, is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueams people. Since this call is attended by people all over Canada and elsewhere, I would like us to take a brief moment in silence for everyone to reflect on the territory that they are on as well. Thank you. I also want to welcome the invited international guests and friends that we have joining us today. Welcome, and welcome to everyone. 3 words I'm hoping we can all keep in mind today: patience, kindness, and humor. We're obviously meeting over this digital platform, and anytime we're using these digital platforms, we can have bumps in the roads and hiccups. Internet can suddenly cut out, and it's just we have a practice here on Stimulus Connect of just practicing this patience, kindness, and humor as these things will happen. To bridge a little bit of the digital divide, because we would certainly rather be doing this in person, I'd encourage you, if you'd like to introduce yourselves to everyone else using the chat. We have 220 people registered for this event. I see that we're coming up to 100 participants right now on the participant list, and we'll probably get others joining. But if folks can introduce themselves using the chat, that would be wonderful. And while that's going on, a couple pieces to note. We're using the hashtag #StimulusConnect today for today's event. You may also wish to check out #Stimulus2018. That was the hashtag that was used for the Stimulus conference 2 years ago. You can still see some awesome images from that. So I'd encourage folks to check that out as well. Questions for panelists throughout the presentation can go in the Q&A, which I'll be watching, and you can upload them. Julie Soleil it will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A, and can help with any tech issues. And she's fully bilingual, so please feel free to reach out to her in either English or in French. The event is being recorded and will be available on the Stimulus website in the next week or so. On that Stimulus website, you can see that we've got 12 resources so far. And if we identify more today, we will add those in. And the website links will be in the chat. This was said a little bit earlier, but I want to emphasize again, we welcome questions in whichever language you prefer. We also wanted to welcome some special folks, invited guests, some registrants we have from some rural, frontier, and isolated communities. That includes Wadena, Saskatchewan, Gaspé, Quebec, Masset on Haida Gwaii, Drumheller, Alberta. We've got some folks coming in from Whitehorse and Lambton Shores, Ontario. And I mentioned we also have some folks joining internationally. So we've got some folks from Italy, from Nigeria, from Slovenia, Norway, and the United States. And a really special welcome to folks that we've got from the National Advocacy Service for People Who Use Drugs in Ireland. Welcome to you. And I also really want to thank a big thanks to the people who use drugs that have been involved in planning today and our panelists. Getting to today, we're going to hear about the Stimulus 2018 conference, and in particular, how the conference ensured that people who use drugs led the way in the organization and delivery of the event, including the implementation of an overdose prevention service. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters. They're going to present for 25-30 minutes. Hannah Brooks is our first presenter. I'll pass it over to her, and while she's beginning, I'll get the PowerPoint presentation on screen. Over to you, Hannah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Brooks. I am the data coordinator for the 3 community-based supervised consumption services in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I also work as a researcher with the Inner City Health and Wellness Program at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. So yeah, and the reason why I'm presenting today is because I helped out with the stimulus OPS. I did the data for that. And we also worked, we published a paper about it, which we will link to later. And now we're working on sharing with the world about the amazing Stimulus 2018 conference. So yes, here you have the hashtags. We have, this is our current hashtag, Stimulus Connect. And then there's also the one that was used for the conference, which is hashtag Stimulus 2018. Okay, next slide, Patrick. Let's see. Okay, so for this webinar, we just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, and we wanted to come just to some basic understandings. At Stimulus Connect, we support the motto, nothing about us without us. And this is used to communicate the idea that anything that impacts people who use drugs should be decided with the full and equitable inclusion of people who use drugs. We also believe in good policy equals good harm reduction. People who use drugs and people who work in the field of harm reduction, they planned and implemented the Stimulus 2018 conference. The conference planners received very good feedback, but of course there are things that they would have done differently next time. Another contextual factor to keep in mind is that in 2018, the toxic drug supply caused higher numbers of drug poisonings in Western Canada than in other regions of Canada. So ensuring the safety and well-being of people who use drugs at this conference was really important. Okay, next slide. So why is the participation of people who use drugs at conferences important? Well, consequential decisions with enduring impacts have been made at conferences. At the 1912 First International Opium Conference, the first international narcotics treaty was signed. As you can see right here, it says countries agreed to control all persons and buildings, manufacturing, importing, selling, distributing, and exportations of morphine, cocaine, and their respective salts. People who use drugs were not given an equitable voice at this conference. And unfortunately, this treaty had significant and long-lasting impacts in countries across the world. For example, and Patrick, you can go ahead and click the next link. I found this news article is really interesting. Sergeant John Dunn and Corporal Jackson, they raided an opium joint in New Orleans, where they found someone named Dude Calvin and Ida Fisher smoking so-called hop, which was opium. They were immediately labeled as inmates, as you can see here, and were arrested. And this happened just 1 month after the signing of this treaty. Okay, next slide. So therefore, people who use drugs must lead the discussion at conferences where drugs will be discussed. And they must demand the adoptions of policies and interventions that will lead to the most benefits and cause the least harm. When people who use drugs are given greater equity at conferences, beneficial policies have been discussed and committed to by attendees. For example, in the early 1990s, the HIV and AIDS epidemic and the subsequent increase of hepatitis C rates catalyzed people who use drugs to mobilize and demand access to national and international health and drug use conferences. At these conferences, people who use drugs successfully advocated for the establishment, legalization, and funding of needle and syringe programs in many countries across the world. However, people who use drugs in research, who participate in research, advocacy, or policy work, have also at times described barriers to participating in this work. People who use drugs have described facing stigma and discrimination when interacting with members of the government or policymakers, and have expressed concerns being tokenized or exploited. People who use drugs have also described insufficient financial compensation and have described experiencing emotional distress when participating in research, advocacy, or policy work due to previous trauma or insufficient emotional supports. Therefore, guidance is needed on how to ensure the physical and emotional safety of people who use drugs who participate in and attend conferences. That's why we wanted to describe the Stimulus 2018 conference today. Hopefully we will have some good discussion. And if any of you are conference planners, hopefully you'll pursue a more equitable and safe participation of people who use drugs at your conference. Thank you, Patrick.
Next slide. So the bottom left-hand corner picture here is actually what was called the Edmonton Shaw Conference Center, which is now called the Edmonton Convention Center. The event was held in October. It was 2.5 days with about 2 to 3 days of satellites happening ahead of time. We believe we had 800 people there, with about a third or so of folks who were people who use drugs. Really, the event was strategically planned, and we really did our best to try and think about everything. Marlis and I had one rule, and this rule was really about our experience of being at a conference where somebody came in from Eastern Canada. His name was Rafi, who actually died at the conference we were at, which was in the early days around scaling up of OPS and SCS. So our minimum standard was no one dies. The conference itself was based on the reality that Alberta had been holding up till then 13 provincial harm reduction and drug policy conferences, and to some degree people felt that they were the de facto national conference because people really enjoyed them. There was a previous national conference in Canada, and it had been held about 15 years ahead, and none of us actually knew anything about who had planned it. And so we had no resource related to that. The national organizations in Canada who work in harm reduction and drug policy really came to the Alberta providers of the previous conferences, which are the harm reduction programmers in Alberta, and said, listen, you guys have been doing this. We hope that you would be interested in partnering with us to hold a national conference. This was the reason why it was in Alberta. The national partners, the first ones really in, were the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, who've changed their name to the HIV Legal Network. Almost everything we did at Stimulus was based on what we did in Alberta. The forum started there, the concepts, the theory, all of those pieces started there. And so Marlis Taylor, who's on the call today, is going to help me with these slides. As all planners, we decided this about 20 minutes ago, and we're going to do this collaboratively. It's going to be great. The National Planning Committee for Stimulus 2018 wasn't as robust as we would like now in looking in hindsight, but we had the National Planning Committee had 2 Edmontonians who happened to also be member of the local group of people who use drugs, as it is, the provincial, which is AWARE, Alberta Addicts who educate and advocate responsibly, AWARE, and CAPUD, the national. So Chanel is here, and Chanel can give us a wave. She's going to be able to speak to this more. Both her and Karen joined. Obviously, the executive director of CAPUD, the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. Julie Soleil is here from AIDQ. She was one of the folks on that planning committee. The Legal Network, as well as all 7, missed the CRISM, the Alberta node of CRISM, the national researchers, and the 7 Alberta harm reduction organizations were involved in a range of degrees as we moved along. We, as Albertans, were happy to figure out how to do this conference planning and communications in a way that was bilingual. This was new for us. As you can imagine, in Alberta, we don't do a lot of bilingual national conferences. And so we're excited to do this. And we were able to provide not just bilingual communications in the conference, but also 2 conference spaces, our 2 biggest conference spaces, where we were able to provide simultaneous interpretation. Shout out to Carolyn from Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, and Julie Soleil from AIDQ, who would often have to fix our Google Translate badness before we sent it out, or just wrote stuff for us. They were great that way. Slide. One of the important parts about this conference is the basics of that we actually don't hire event coordinators. We hire harm reductionists. We engage people who understand harm reduction and drug policy to do the work. It's one of the reasons I was the lead staff. I had just left harm reduction in Alberta. And so I was working in a different sector. So we actually hired and engaged other people and brought on the staff as we needed them. And really did our best to make sure we were looking at this from a health and safety of the folks coming to the conference approach, because at the end of the day, we just didn't want anybody to be negatively impacted by the conference. As you know, in harm reduction, relationships are the key part. And when you're conference planning and bringing lots of really cool people and doing work that's a bit unusual for hotels and conference sites, you need to make sure that you have those relationships, that you've built them, that they feel they can ask you any questions. And I often would say, really important to answer, especially if they're folks outside of the sector, answer all the questions in long answer. So, somebody said to me, okay, why are you being so, I think this was a Shaw Conference Center, why are you being so caring about the breakout food? And I said, well, okay, so one, breakout food can be quite boring, because if I see another apple and orange at a conference, I'm going to want to poke myself in the eye. But also some people that are coming to the conference aren't going to have the best dental care. So let's go with breakout food that is softer. And which is why you got things like watermelon and grapes, and instead of apples and oranges. There's also a silly thing that Marlis wanted, which you'll see a picture of later, which is great. We made sure that the community organizations and the government, health services, community health services, nonprofits all knew that the conference was coming, that we're going to bring a whole bunch of folks into town and that they were going to access services. We wanted to make sure they know that, so that people were welcoming, but also understood that it's possible they're going to get lost trying to find those places. We did provide them with maps and important things like that, but we tried to do our best. For the host hotels, we ensured that the hotel had all the training they wanted ahead of time. So it's a nice opportunity to have a conversation with them about good sharps disposal, how we could be helpful if there was an emergency, how we'd prefer they called the staff we'd embedded into the space. And when I say staff, I mean conference goers who worked in harm reduction or drug policy, who would deal with stuff on site, as a way to try and prevent the automatic calling of 911. As far as I know, nobody had to call 911 ever. Another example of these relationships was really about working with the convention center. So we weren't sleeping in the same, sometimes with conferences, you're in the same hotel. The same hotel you sleep at is the same hotel at the conference. In this case, we actually having a specific conference site. So we're not there 24 hours a day. But what we early learned on is that this conference site and Edmonton were having lots of conversations about EDM music events. And that electronic dance music and that rave feel was something that they're actually putting in. And so it was helpful to have conversations about space and movement and our event, also in the greater context of this will also work when you host EDM events. And we were able to link them in to Indigo, which is the local EDM harm reduction organization, and really be able to build that relationship. We did things like, we are actually talking about festival safety, festival harm reduction, festival drug policy with cool folks like Chloe and Julie Soleil at it. If you want to come to those sessions, here's when they are. Please come. We've let the speakers know that you're going to be there. And please ask any questions because you're here and this is going to be helpful for you too as well. Marlis may want to add here, but there's an important interplay around drug policy and harm reduction at the stimulus conference. Sometimes you're at conferences, they're They're very much about only harm reduction, or they're very much only about drug policy. And in this case, we see that, of course, in a lot of the communities, the interplay, those people are the same folks. And that this conference, we wanted to make sure that all of those folks were welcome and that there was good connection between those organizations. Marlis, you're welcome to jump in, but you don't have to.
You're doing great.
Next slide, please. So we populated this slide deck today with a bunch of pictures that we pulled off our Facebook. So if you see a picture of yourself, don't freak out. You've already posted it online and we've just gathered it from there. So when we talk about leadership and inclusion, and I really want to defer to people like Chanel and Frank and Natasha around the leadership of people who use drugs, because as they were those leaders, it was really important that they speak to that. What I will say is that folks who use drugs were part of everything. So they were part of the local work, they were part of the provincial work, and they were part of the national work. To say they were an equal part, I think they were more than equal part. They were leading. They were on every subcommittee. They were involved in all of the conversations, and we took a lot of, as myself as staff, took a lot of direction and made sure that that I was doing what should be done and doing it correctly. For scholarships and per diems, always in the Alberta conferences and now at Stimulus, we really recognize that people who should be at this conference are often the people who can't afford to attend the conference. We put a lot of money into the scholarships, and we really worked hard to bring everybody we possibly could. We also encouraged other people to tithe or to designate their own money to conference scholarships, whether or not we organize those folks or they organize those folks. So as far as scholarships we held, and we're going to talk more about scholarships in a bit here, but I know that Katie brought people, Kapud brought people, BCCSU and CRISM brought people, all separate from our scholarship process. So our scholarship numbers are just ours and don't include those other folks. As you know, when you're at a conference, having money to be able to afford to eat, but also be able to afford drugs if you need to, or to get a cab, all of that is important. So we actually worked hard to make sure that people had a per diem that would hopefully cover off some of those. In retrospect, we would do it differently and it would be more. But for now, that's what we have. And of course, as our first time out, we tried to do what we could. As part of inclusion, we made sure there was gender neutral bathrooms. Lots of conversations about that with the hotel or with the conference site. They made these signs. You can see that at the bottom right-hand corner there. They made these signs that they were permanent or that they could be applied and reused over time. So at the EDM events, they said, and it was exciting when they said to me, would we need these at the Homeless Connect event? And I said, well, yes, you would. And they were happy to be able to do that. For us in Alberta and for myself, who's unilingual, the inclusion and doing the best inclusion around including folks from Quebec and other francophones was really important. We did our best to try and be available to them and really searched out places and times where we could have folks who could help where we knew for sure we needed dual language. Julie Soleil is here to be able to answer questions related to that because her experience as one of those folks coming in from Quebec is important, and she was the key person in teaching and helping and leading in that space. Slide. As you can tell, I'm working.
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I can just go back 1 second, Patrick. When we talk about the need for daily stipends and per diems, where that struck me the most is probably.
Oh, we lost Marlis. Actually, can I ask the folks on the panel who aren't presenting right now to turn off their video to try and give her a bit of band space? Some space, some electronic space. And we may have to come back to her. All right. Marlis, when you pop back, you're on. I'm just gonna go on. We did some work to try and really create spaces that were inclusive and available and interesting. There was a lot of pictures like the one at the bottom right-hand corner of people just gathering and being exciting and wanting to memorialize the event. We had an art installation, which is the one at the top corner there, called Queer Coping Mechanisms, which was a traveling art installation that that came in through one of the abstracts, and we okayed and was linked actually into a session. And so pretty excited that was able to be there. And the bottom left-hand corner, we're really, in Alberta, trying to do our best around reconciliation and recognizing the TRC recommendations and doing our damnedest to do this well. Of course, we had lots of really wonderful elders from the Treaty 6 territory welcoming people to the community. We created a space called the Indigenous Welcoming Room, and this is just the bottom left-hand corner is a picture of that, one of the tables there, and you can see that there's smudge, there's sweetgrass. You could smudge at any time. People drum. One of our satellite events was a circle, a welcoming and a well-briety circle, and that circle was held in that space. And we really tried to work hard to make sure that folks understood what territory they were coming on, if they had any questions, and that the Indigenous conference goers had space that they could call their own. Now I can see Marlis is just coming back online. And can we hear you now, Marlis? All right, I'm going to talk about free hugs, and then maybe Marlis will be good to go. This weird thing happened. I was at an international conference, and there were people who had T-shirts that said free hugs. And I tell you, I walked out of one of those sessions that day, and I needed a hug, and I got a hug. Now, I had to do some advocacy to get free hugs at Stimulus 2018, but people were like, okay, Shay, you crazy person. We'll let you have people hug people. Now, the free hugs was one of the things that was the most surprising. And I think Corrine Lambert's here in the audience today. And we had these little stickers. They would go on your, whatever you were wearing that day or on your program, whatever. And if you wanted a hug, those people might be open to having a hug. We had hug rules, like hugs had to be consensual and no surprise hugging. But we actually found that the free hugs made a big impact to the people going to the conference, but actually made a larger impact to the people who were giving out free hugs. And for some of those folks who were folks who use drugs every day, physical touch wasn't something that happened often or often enough. And so they found that was a very simple thing that was interesting and exciting. And I'm not going to cry on this international webinar today. One of the things, and I really suspect Marlis might be the best person to speak to this, but or maybe I'm just wanting to include Marlis. Conference drop. For many people, you might have experienced something really awesome happening, and there was lots of really good, chemicals that came with that. So whether that's serotonin or oxytocin, or just like adrenaline, lots of really all those good love feelings. We knew that conferences like this, and we'd experienced this in Alberta for the 13 before, that there was a substantial conference drop. Marlis?
Yeah, I recall going to a conference. We took a number of our community members along, like folks that are people with expertise in drug use. And when we got back without even thinking, we dropped people off where they wanted to be dropped off, and I tootled off to my nice home, and life was grand. And then the next day or two, I came across one of our folks, and he said, you dropped me off outside the homeless shelter that I stay in. And I stood there for a while and just kind of went, oh my God, I'm back to real life. That wasn't real the last couple of days. It was the best time, but it wasn't real. And I think that really was a very stark piece of knowledge for me, to know that we needed to pay better attention and to try and prepare people that they might feel very let down once the conference is over. And so that was something that we strive to do.
one of the great things about working with Marlis and with Streetworks and then their host organization, which is the Boyle Street Community Services, is Marlis can engage a whole bunch of the other departments she works with. And so one of the really awesome departments and folks that she was able to engage in were people, which was Maruk and Rohan. They were available on Thursday and Friday to provide emotional support to folks. So they sort of just wandered about, and if memory serves, Corrine could link people together. So if somebody showed up at the office who was looking for for a bit of emotional connection, we could connect them in. And so those folks were at the conference and were able to hang out with us, but also were great resources if somebody wanted to debrief or wanted to connect. Next slide.
And they were provisional psychologists that work out of Boyle Street.
So here's some basic numbers. People really like numbers. I'll let you read that. I won't read that to you. The scholarship parties were always people who use drugs. And then the secondary were people from rural, isolated frontier communities, smaller NGOs, folks with financial need, of course. We worked really hard to ensure that not only people could make it to the conference, but people felt comfortable when they were there. We did things that were kind of fun. We had a surprise speaker at the last plenary. That's Sandia from AIDQ. That's her with Donald McPherson up in the top there. You know, we're pretty chill. And as somebody said in the chat, you're right, we're not apples and oranges people. So if you wanted to sit on the floor in that space, you sat on the floor. It's totally fine. We, as part of our evaluation, if you participated in the listening post, you got a sticker on your name tag and it said, I made my point. All of those are great things. We had entirely too many abstracts to green light them all. So we did what we could to do that. We had a range of volunteers, including students, folks who use drugs, community members, conference goers. When we quantified their time, that came out to a donation of $8,500. Our exhibition hall had a lot of booths, including local artisans that again were linked into the Boyle Street Community Services. We had specific volunteers who curated and ran a film festival for 2 days. It's pretty amazing stuff. Let's see, slide. One of the things we've always done at the Alberta conferences, which we followed through, you're going to hear me say that a bunch of times, is collaborating with other organizations. As you know, it can take a lot of money and time to get people together. And if you're going to get people together, it makes sense to do the other meetings. So we actually partnered with all of these organizations to hold satellite events. So these were events that weren't the stimulus responsibility, but what we have always done is tried to support them. So we actually purchased or rented conference space and conference session rooms out in advance of our event so that they could hold their meetings. So you really just show up and at least they had a space. Some of them did bigger or different things. Some people did public events during, you can slide. Oh, wait, before you slide, Patrick, that's a picture of all the awesome drug checkers across Canada who not only came and held their own meeting, but also did drug checking education the day before the conference started. And I see that some of you are here today. And I think Jared's in the slide twice this week. So those satellite events. So we knew that when you go to conferences, people really want to go see the new cute, cool programs. So we ensured that we'd set up tours to go see the Boyle Street Community Services supervised consumption. Those sold out in minutes. And by sold out, I mean, we didn't charge for them, of course, but I mean, the registration was gone. There was a couple meet and greets. There were 3 annual general meetings. Talked about the circle already. Chrism held a research meeting. Katie heard a programming dialogue. Streetworks wasn't feeling that they had enough work in just holding a national conference, but they also held a 1-day satellite on pregnancy and substance use. We had those drug checking meetings. Mom Stop the Harm did How Can Communities Support Families Affected by the Opioid Crisis, which was for anybody who wanted to attend, including Edmontonians or folks from the surrounding communities. INSHU was here, and they did a Hep C treatment training for physicians, and the awesome harm reduction nurses from across Canada are there. I will note that there was a range of different ways to get in. There was 2 meetings that actually would have been identified as secret meetings. One of them wouldn't be too much of a surprise. If you were from a province who was expecting a quite conservative, radical, right-wing government coming in, you would want to chat with each other about that beforehand. Slide. We tried to do a bunch of different things, and often are really around art and theater and poetry and all this great stuff. We had some limitations around money, but we still managed to pull some really great stuff out. So obviously, folks were allowed to express themselves where and however they wanted to. There was an actual, at the bottom right-hand corner, where there's actually a quilt, which we'll talk a bit more about later, but where you can actually make your own panel to recognize the resilience of the movement. There was an opportunity to talk about a moment that moved you in your past. So this one says, for those of you who are on little phones, when we tried to resuscitate a 23-year-old woman who overdosed, we failed. She was alone. We didn't even know her name. This is something that somebody had experienced prior to the conference and wanted to memorialize through persistence resistance. Slide. The right-hand screen pictures are also of persistence resistance. So Shane Calder from AIDS Vancouver Island, which changed their name, and Shane is now one of my coworkers at the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. But they in Vancouver, in Victoria, had this great idea around trying to really gather some of the history of the movement. And so, and you can see on the walls, there was lots of little pieces and memorabilia and that sort of stuff. All of these were also tagged by year, so when they happened. And so you can see on this side. So if you're looking at the plenary room and you're like, what's all that stuff on the walls? It was actually an art installation to really remember how the previous at least dozen years of pushing back and saving lives went. The positive resistance community quilt is, and you can see Kat there on the right-hand side. This was a quilt that is still undergoing in BC. Really just honoring the people who continue to resist bad drug policy. The We Are Human art was linked to one of the sessions, and in the middle there is the Honoring Our Lost. So there's an actual room designated to spend time, hold space around folks who we've lost to the drug war. Slide. Okay, we're just bragging. Some of you don't know about taco in a bag. It's basically standard powwow food. And that's what the top left hand, that staffer is carrying. That's actually my lunch one day. But it was fun. We had an installation by the great folks at Shambhala. Dominique out of Calgary, if memory serves, brought this. This was 2 large monitors that ran the content that would have ran at Shambhala. So you can actually see at the bottom, at the top, there's messaging around safety, and the bottom was actually drug checking results in real time. We had this on a different floor from our drug checking and from our OPS, but it did still cause a little bit of confusion around whether or not these results were also the Edmonton results. Despite messaging, but it was a good conversation. We, as always, had lots of posters and available. We had a bookstore. We partnered with a local bookseller called Audrey's Books, and they curated and ordered in basically drug policy and harm reduction books. Most of those sold out. As you can imagine, Marlis can be sassy and fun, and she said, well, let's have donuts on the last day. People, it's going to be hard. They're going to be sad. They're going to be going home. We are coming out of the closet to say today, we did not know there was going to be a wall of donuts, and it was just as surprising as us. We thought the donuts were going to come on a plate, but instead they came on a wall, and it caused some concern. Donald McPherson from CDPC has yet to see the wall in person. I don't know what he was doing during that break, but he wasn't eating donuts. Slide. Sorry, just reading the chat. As you can imagine, bringing lots of folks from across Canada has lots of different issues to work around. And so when we talk about what we did to provide and really did sort of risk management for the conference, we provided a bunch of different things. And so I'm just going to highlight some of them. We ordered naloxone. So naloxone is funded through the ministry here in Alberta. We ordered naloxone. We didn't know how many people were coming, and we wanted to make sure we didn't run out, and we didn't know how it was going to go. So we ordered more naloxone than we actually needed. But we weren't upset that provinces and territories that didn't have naloxone access took some home. And did our best. And in fact, the naloxone distribution was scheduled for some of Marlis's staff to train and educate. And we ended up, the vendors who are from the pharma and create the kits actually ended up also training folks because it was so busy. There's a picture from the Positive Resistance Quilt. One of the relationships we had is with Metro City Clinic and the Downtown Prescription Center. It was on the same city block as the host hotel, or that we would call the Kaput or Aware Hotel. They coordinated with folks ahead of time to ensure that there was daily dispensing of oat. And that included things like KDN, methadone, that sort of thing. They also did some stuff that was really great. They opened up early so that conference goers could get their prescription and still make it to the conference for 9 a.m. We were lucky enough that they had bilingual staff, so we were able to provide that as well. And they also were ready in case we had any problems with people who hadn't planned ahead around their medications. Next slide. All right, so I won't read the text on the right-hand side. This is directly off of our website at the time. That really talked about the toxic drug supply and what it was like in Alberta and what our concerns were. One of the things we did, which we didn't publicly talk about before today much, is the Edmonton Drug Guide. This drug guide had content and information that was from folks who use drugs in Edmonton. Including they provided the pictures and things like that for us. This was something that I actually put together. I didn't gather all the content. I have no idea what the cost of crack was in Edmonton, none of those things. But what we did is put it together so that there would be some sort of resource so that conference goers wouldn't get ripped off, but also they had an idea of what the costs were and what things were cooking down as. I'm not sure if Marlis, you want to add anything.
I think it was about being realistic. People typically, at a farm conference, you're not going to think so much about substance use, or everyone's going to go to the bar, which is another supervised consumption facility. But in this case, this was about and for people who are using substances that are on the illicit market generally. With a lack of safe supply, with sort of a patchwork of different kinds of availability to people, across the provincial borders or beyond, we had to be realistic here. And so in trying to help people not die, which was our lowest standard, but the most important one, we had to think realistically about what is it that we need to do. And if we can't give people a safe supply of substances, how can we help them be as knowledgeable as possible? And then Streetworks are always talking about what skills, knowledge, resources, and support do people need. And so this was very much a part of it.
Marlis, while I still have you, while Arthur turns his video screen on, can you talk to the work you did around getting the provincial exemption for the OPS? And next slide.
Sure. So the way that it worked in this province is that we had in Edmonton, we had 3 community supervised consumption services and 1 acute care, 1 at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. And the 3 are closely connected, but we wanted something in the actual venue. So one of the things that was possible through Alberta Health was to apply for a temporary OPS, so an overdose prevention site. In that process, then we had to fill out an application. They provided a small amount of money to help us run it. That went through to the Chief Medical Officer of Health office. There was a committee struck to look at that application and see if it met what they needed. It actually was only a 3-day turnaround. Because it was such a short time frame, there was not going to be a need for a huge community consultation. So the neighbors all the way around, this was a life-saving intervention. And so we got that exemption letter, or got the OPS, I guess you call it they agreed to it just a couple of days ahead of time, but we knew that it was very likely that it would be coming. So that gave us the green light to go ahead with the OPS.
Arthur.
Hey, everybody, I'm Arthur. At the time of the conference, I was working as a harm reduction support worker at the SCS at Boyle Street in Edmonton. The actual consumption site itself in the conference was open for 8 till 5:30 Wednesdays and on Wednesday and Thursday, and 8 till 12:30 on Friday. Basically, I staffed and kind of managed the staff during the conference. We had nurses and other OPS and SCS staff from all across Canada who came and helped volunteer for those days. We also had supplies available for use from all across Canada. So at different SCSs or OPSs, they use different, I would say, cookers or certain gauge needles and stuff like that. We were trying to be as accommodating as we could with all the supplies that we had, depending on what people were used to using. There was 4 booths set up as best as we could with the resources we had. We had first aid, overdose prevention, we had naloxone distribution, we had oxygen there, which it wasn't needed anyway. And it was pretty close to the back exit for EMS in case we did need any emergency medical services, which we didn't the whole time. Yeah, as Marla said, we only really received the exemption application and funding request like 3 days before the event. So it's kind of a scramble to get it all set up. There was people that came and used it. Pretty well everybody that did come and use it was used to being in a overdose prevention site or safe consumption site before. I think there might have been 1 or 2 people that had never been to one before. They definitely thought it was very beneficial to be able to go and use while they were at the conference. Really the only, I wouldn't say issue, but maybe lessons learned for next time, we would have like a kind of a mock room where people can go see what it looked like, because there was people trying to see the service and while other people were trying to use it. And other than that, everything went great. Like I said, I think it was very beneficial for everybody. And yeah, I hope to see it again at other conferences. So
Thanks,
I think
Slide.
Chloe's next.
Yep.
I believe.
Yeah, so Anchors was invited by Stimulus to come and run a drug checking program at the conference. So I brought the infrared spectrometer on the airplane with me, and I would recommend not putting that in the fragile compartment if you ever do that, because it took me 2 days to get it working again after doing that. Next time I carry it in my tote bag. I had a small team that came to volunteer to run the service, and we ran for the hours that the OPS ran, and ran in the same room as the OPS so people could test their substances before they used. And then we posted results up on the board outside of the OPS. And we did about 18 samples. Some samples were brought to us from a local OPS so that we could do some checking of what was around. There were 6 samples where people believed they were heroin. There was no heroin in any of the samples, and all of them were caffeine, mannitol, fentanyl, or caffeine, xylitol, and fentanyl. We weren't able to do any quantification of fentanyl at the time, which we are now in BC working on and I'm doing a bit more of. And I think that that's very important to be able to do quantification so that we can let people know what they're looking at for fentanyl concentrations. So for next time, I think that would be important. One of the things that I thought was interesting too is we had a real diverse mix of drugs people were testing. So there was MDMA, there was some research chemicals, there was cocaine, and then there was the fentanyl and heroin. So that was really great. I think having a technology that is really mobile, that you can move around and set up really quickly is important for setting up a drug checking service that's kind of a pop-up like this. We were able to take it down and set it up within a few minutes each day and then just lock it in a closet. I think lessons learned, like Arthur said, having more privacy for folks. So there was a lot of tourism. People are pretty fascinated by the whole drug checking service. So we had a lot of visitors, a lot of people wanting to take pictures, and I think it made it a little bit awkward for folks who wanted to test their drugs anonymously. I also think that next time it would be great to have an OPS with drug checking at the hotel where people are using drugs in the evening, so that I always find if you can check drugs where people are using drugs, people are more likely to check their drugs. That's why it works at festivals so well, because people are using drugs right there. So that might be something to think about for another conference, is just having that service in a place where people are using a lot. Thanks. Onwards with the next slide.
This slide is the bottom half of the slide we saw on the other side. So that's the leftover data, or the bottom of the whiteboard data. We're super high tech because this is how we kept our data, is with the picture. Chloe was a rock star and found these this morning. And as Hannah mentioned earlier, we were lucky enough to have folks like Hannah, Elaine Hishka, Cassandra, Arthur, and Marlis author a paper for the International Journal of Drug Policy around the work we did with the overdose prevention site. It is one of the 12 resources that are on our website, so you can see them there. And if somebody wants a link right now, I'm sure Hannah or Julie Seeley can pull that out as well. Slide. Oh, the not so good stuff. So we had some projections around the emotional conference drop and how that was going to go. Pretty sure it was worse than we had planned. We found weird. Sorry, somebody asked me to do something and it popped up on my screen. One of the tricky parts with the scholarships is that the folks who were getting a scholarship and who we had planned to put in the Aware Kaput Hotel, some of them in retrospect wouldn't have preferred that hotel, and so we would just do that differently. We did have some people who were surprised by what they walked into. They were, I suspect they were folks whose boss told them they should come to this conference, and they did, but hadn't actually looked too much into us. We hadn't prepared, although we tried to do a lot of work to make sure it was a welcoming, inclusive community for people who do frontline harm reduction, who are people who use drugs, who are policy wonks and activists. We didn't prepare other people to be walking into a space where we value people who use drugs as the experts that they are. And so some of those folks were a bit surprised, and it took them a bit of time to process through that. So that's all I'll mention there. We talked about overdose prevention site tourism, and we would probably do how we manage media a bit differently. We, as you know, all of us were doing this off the side of our desk, so we would be a bit more coordinated. And sad pandas all around. We did not have Stimulus 2020 in Gatineau at the end of September 2020 because of COVID. Next slide, please. As with
Can I just add one thing?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just because I think, you know, for people who are new to the idea of a conference that really includes and involves and is by and for people who use substances, I think they have this idea that it's a great big old crazy drug taking, you know, hundreds of people, Haight-Ashbury, 1960s kind of a thing. We had no incidents. I think the biggest incident that I came across was in one of the hotels. Someone had taken a bit more shampoo than what the hotel was hoping for, and so they were going to charge us for it. But I mean, seriously, that was it. That, you know, for anyone who may have doubted that, and you know, this is not new information for anyone who's held a conference anywhere for harm reduction or drug policy, but the reality is, you know, people's fears completely were quelled because we were able to prove that, you know, that sort of thinking was terribly incorrect and terribly stigmatizing. Probably there is more incidents at a, you know, a different kind of a conference where alcohol is the main drug of choice. Just saying, might not be true, but.
As with most conferences, we did do a conference evaluation. As you know, there are some limitations to conferences and evaluation because you actually aren't going to do anything the same. You're not going to put it in the same. The topics aren't going to be the same. So the purpose of our outcome evaluation was about increasing the knowledge, whether or not there was increase in knowledge of skills, whether or not there was networking with peers, and whether or not people felt supported in their efforts. We used 3 methods. We used a listening post, which was a work with volunteers who basically asked people as they came out of sessions questions. We did some qualitative outcome questions, and we did a post-conference survey. Slide. Here's some of the outcomes of them. And again, this document is one of the documents on the Stimulus Connect website. So you can, if you are like me who like to read stuff like this, go ahead and take a chance as you can see. We're also using a lot of the stimulus colors in the graph. So if you guys are like so much pink today, that's why. Attendees overwhelmingly reported positive impacts. They had 99% discussed what they'd learned or experienced at Stimulus Connect with other folks. 87% influenced thinking or decisions that you've made, and 80% actually had a dramatic or noteworthy impact on folks. Certainly here we are over 2 years later, and we're still having these conversations and wanting to do some more about how this works. Slide. So some of these you've already heard again. We would absolutely increase the leadership of folks who use drugs, people who are Indigenous, Black, and others of color, and youth. Period. Nothing more to say on that. We would ensure that there was better income and more consistent income. I would note, and I don't think we've talked about it yet, but we did daily dispense stipend or per diems to folks. We did that as a way to just keep 6 on folks. We were worried about how people were doing. By the time the conference came around, T and Ashley, who'd been managing scholarships, had a pretty good relationship with most of the folks who were coming in. And so it was a good way to do that. We were on track for having safe supply in Gatineau at 2020. So we would of course do that. We need a bilingual staff. We definitely need childcare on site. Increased simultaneous translation in the rooms. So more rooms, more than just 2. Of course, we'll do what we said we were going to do from the report recommendations that again are available to read. One of the things we'd also add is that whatever the host community is, that there would be like a bit more of a dramatic and positive impact or events in the local community, because you're going to have this opportunity where you're bringing everybody from across Canada. It'd be a great way to do something that's good for the host community. I'm gonna next hand off, so you can go ahead and slide, Patrick, hand off to Frank, who I think will start us off, and then it's possible Natasha and Chanel will pop in as well. So you might want to put your video on, friends. Thank you.
Natasha, you want to start us off?
Sure, I can start.
Yeah,
Frank.
please, and thanks.
See,
Yeah.
I don't see your video. I'm trying to turn your video.
I can't get it. I don't know. Yes.
I just sent something to your screen.
Okay.
You're on.
There you are. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we're here to sort of speak to the hotel experience, as well as Chanel had, had a lot of groundwork laying out everything with Marlis, and so I didn't know, Chanel, you wanted to speak to that piece first, or did you want me to just start talking about the atmosphere at the hotel?
I guess I can chime in here a little bit. So I am, like was previously stated, my name is Chanel Tuan. I am a member of the facilitator for the local chapter of AWARE, Alberta Addicts Who Educate and Advocate Responsibly here in Edmonton. Our chapter is called As It Is. And As It Is has been continuously involved in the number of conferences that actually came before Stimulus Connect. And so Streetworks had already even set up quite well in the way of inclusion when it comes to taking into considerations of people who use substances when attending conferences, because they had done so in 13 previous Alberta conferences, the Alberta Harm Reduction conferences that had taken place previously to Stimulus Connect becoming the national conference. So when it came to participants who come from across the country and were people who use drugs, when we were able to connect, because also Kaput had our AGM there at the same time at the hotel. We were able to institute within the hotel a safety mechanism, which ended up becoming an OPS that was in the rooms of one of our members, to be able to make sure that, like Marla said, right, the lowest possible standard was that we had provision of naloxone available to be able to help and assist our friends who may have needed that intervention at the time. And I would say that we had an absolutely great amount of naloxone that was there. We had friends and folks who brought actually some naloxone themselves, and some folks had some nasal naloxones that we were able to distribute after folks who we didn't need a lot of naloxone. Actually, at the hotel at the OPS, I only ended up having to Narcan one person, and that person was safe and healthy and alive because of the measures that were put in place in regard to having an unofficial OPS at the hotel.
Yeah, are you okay if I kick in now?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so at the hotel, so I mean, I think it's been highlighted as one OPS, but I think there was many really at the hotel, and that's something common. It's something common that we do at every conference, because generally people who use drugs haven't been able to, previously have exemptions for these spaces, and I call these caring spaces for us. Like when people use together, we congregate together. So yeah, as Chanel said, there was naloxone there were supplies there. Most of us brought naloxone from across the country. And, but as well, we were able to get access to supplies at the Stimulus conference and get supplies through our other fellow members. On our floor specifically, there was a few different spots, the floor that Frank's room was on. And so basically we just cared for each other and hung out in each other's rooms and checked on each other. And it was a really great space from my perspective. I mean, moving forward, we'd like to have a formalized one with an exemption so that we could run it. We would also have drug checking, as Chloe mentioned too, because that's a really important aspect, because the conference site was open during the day, but the hotel was utilized 24 hours a day. And so I think moving forward, there's the need to have one at both sites, both the conference and at the hotel. And I would say the one at the hotel would have to be 24/7, just because of, people use where they live and where they hang out with their friends. And it's just a way that people care for each other. So I'll let Frank sort of speak to his room specific.
Okay, one of the things we need to do is to have, my room was used as an OPS. I was up all night, never slept. I had to keep babysitting my colleagues, which is good. But also, next time, what we should do in moving forward is to have the 24/7 people in OPS's room, but they must be paid staff. They have to be paid. Also, too, another thing with the conference, which I found that was really, I was one of the presenters at the conference. We need more people of color presenting at these conferences. It is something that is lacking. Black people use drugs like anybody else. So where are the Black people when it comes to these conferences? So that is something that we have to be mindful of, and use more Black and LGBTQ and indigenous people at these conferences. One thing that struck me most of all, which I think was maybe one of the best things in the conference, was the healing circle, which was done by my colleague Les Harper and Zoe Dodd. It was such a moving thing, whereas the space allotted for that was a small space, and we had to extend that room about 3 times until we went into a longer period of time just to accommodate the people. So these are simple things, as far as I'm concerned, that should be looked into.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right there, Frank. That was like when we were laying the groundwork for next stimulus. That's what I raved about, was the healing circle that we were involved with. It was one of the most moving spaces I'd ever been in. And yeah, I was a big advocate for making sure that we do replicate that, because it was a very moving and profound space for me to be in. And it was and I think Marla spoke to like people being dropped off after a conference and that letdown. I mean, we felt it all across the country, because from my perspective, like Stimulus was a conference where we brought so many people who use drugs together across the country, and we networked and we hung out together, we cared for each other, and we had this great big community around us. And it was so sad. Like we had this messenger chat afterwards where we would all connect and be like, oh my goodness, I miss everybody and I miss that community. So it is something that I think we have to look forward, like moving forward, look at finding some kind of a mechanism of a care space for people afterwards, because when we were there, it was like, yeah, we're going to conquer the world. We're going to end all the world problems around people who use drugs. But then you just go back home to reality where you're still being stigmatized and discriminated against. But from my perspective, like even hanging out in Frank's room, where there was an OPS, there was people coming in and out, and it was really just a caring space for all of us to be in. And then, I say this comically, but, right across the street from our hotel just happened to be a strip bar. And so we needed some drugs in the middle of the night. You can just go across the street to the strip bar. It's like, wow.
It was the best drugs.
See? And so everybody raved about that. I mean, the hotel couldn't have been in a better place. But I mean, in all, I think that it was great for us, and people checked on each other in the rooms as well. So, because we recognize that people use different types of drugs and have different mechanism or route of ingestion. And so some people feel more comfortable in one space to another. So it was just making sure that we kept tabs on each other in the hotel and checked in with each other. Another thing I'd like to hit on is moving forward as well, and I think Shay spoke to this, was about safe supply. Because what happened in Edmonton is at the beginning of the conference, or like the few days ahead of time, there was availability of all kinds of different, street drugs. But by we got into like the second day, or a day and a half into it, the supply was starting to deplete, because of how many people we had there. And so then people's drug use patterns changed, and they started to use drugs they probably weren't as common, use every day. So we started to see a change in people's reaction to the substances they were using. And so I think for me, it solidifies the fact that moving forward, we need to have access to safe supply for people that are coming across the country, because as we know, each province and territory has a different drug supply depending on where you are and how drugs come in through the illegal market. Some come through port, a lot do come through port. And so Edmonton, there's no port, right? So the drug supply there is very different than what we were accustomed to on the East Coast, and probably even in BC.
One of the things with safe supply, the safe supply does not go far enough, because it doesn't include everybody. It includes some people. So I believe it's, I wouldn't say safe supply, but I would say a safer supply, because it's for those who inject, or those who snort.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Frank, because there wasn't access to a lot of smokables. But maybe, Chanel, I don't know what you heard either from people, if there was a lack if you heard that there was a lacking need for smokable drugs as well there.
Yeah, I would agree with some of your points, Natasha. I think the influx of folks who were looking for supply, actually, what you stated, it seemed to go quite quickly. And unfortunately, we didn't have the plethora of things that people were used to taking. And so a lot of the things that were available as far as safe supply goes were some type of pharmaceuticals that maybe people weren't used to. And like you said, right, a lot of what was happening was people couldn't get what they would normally take, and so ended up having to utilize what was available to them. And so unfortunately, that wouldn't have been people's preference at the time. But as far as everything in general, in the course of the past decade, and attending, probably close to or over 100 conferences, a lot of them, when we measure up like the metrics when it comes to the overall conference, I would say kind of lag behind in regard to a lot of the considerations that were come up for people who use drugs at the conference. And so with the metrics, lagging behind for various conferences, I think stimulus was able to give us the space that we needed to be able to make sure that we were able to then provide, the skills, the knowledge, the resources and supports for folks to keep them safer and healthier and alive while attending the conference. And yes, definitely, if we could have done anything better, it would have been to access a safe supply, not only of things like methadone and Acadian, but a safe supply of stimulants that people were using, like cocaine and like methamphetamines, like so many other things. And unfortunately, at present time, those things don't exist here in Alberta. And it may be a while, quite a while, before we actually see anything move in the way of headway of safe supply here for us. But definitely, I would agree, safe supply across the board for everything, for everyone.
Okay, well, another thing, what could be done is that when you look at your planning committee, you need a more diverse planning committee. It's predominantly white, your planning committee. You don't have much people. You don't have much Indigenous or Black people included in your committee. So therefore, it's more or less should I say, a walk system. There's no equity there, so that's why we are not being. Everybody's not included in the planning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Frank, and that's sort of what we were trying to do for the next stimulus, and then COVID, came in and screwed everything up on us. But I mean, another thing I wanted to speak to that is quite hilarious that I think Shay spoke to was the AGM that Kaput had there. Ironically, there was like a big RCMP police meet, like in the very next room to our AGM. And it was like, we came out and people were saying, did you know the cops were next door? And I was like, no, I had no idea. But then when we saw the sign, it was there. So, I mean, but they didn't give us a hard time. So it was fine, right? But it was just ironic. But the hotel staff in general were great with everybody that was there. They tried to accommodate everybody. We had no hiccups. I mean, they accepted us for who we were, and that was an amazing experience as well. I don't know, I think Marlis already spoke to, there was only the one complaint about somebody taking too much shampoo. And that hotel, ironically, was just filled with people who use drugs. Like, so guess what, guys? We can go to a conference and we can participate and we can lead and we can do all these things. And you don't have to worry about losing your deposits or like worry about us like trashing the place, because we're just regular people like everybody else that want to go do the work in drug policy and push policy forward that aligns with our interests and our well-being. So I highly recommend anybody that's going to move forward with a conference to have people who use drugs in leadership roles, helping you design and develop all of the implementation of the conference, because that is really the only way that you're going to move forward in a nothing about us without us, is to ensure that you have people like Frank, myself, and other people from the local area and those involved. And that's what I so loved about stimulus and still do, and was really keen to go in on the next stimulus, because I think it went off without a hitch. There might have been, some technical hitches here or there. I'm sure Shay has all kinds of like stress attacks that she had throughout. But I mean, from the perspective of a conference goer, as somebody who is a person who used drugs, I still rave about it all the time. So it was like a kick-ass conference that we all had a great community of people around us, and we took care of each other. And I just hope that, there's been other conferences that we've gone to that haven't been so great and need to do better. And, that's what we're here for, is to help people do better as well. So I would encourage you to reach out to the amazing team of people that developed and implemented the last stimulus, and then the new one, maybe, hopefully 2022, who knows? Depends on COVID and the vaccine, I suppose. But yeah, so moving forward, I think there was lessons learned, and I think our whole conference committee this time moving forward, we're trying to nail in safe supply, trying to ensure that we had better inclusion, and trying to change the dialogue where people who use drugs are recognized as leaders, because really we are, and we need you guys to, like the rest of Canada, to recognize that.
My last point would be, okay, we need more grassroots speakers as opposed to the professionals. For some reason, I think we had too many the professionals presenting at that conference.
Great feedback.
I think,
thank you.
Yeah, lastly, I guess the last point I would like to mention, just in regards to the hotel and us staying there, Natasha, I think Marlis had mentioned, right, the only complaint that was had was somebody had helped themselves to a little bit more shampoo. And I mean, who doesn't love clean hair? But really, there was no trashed rooms. There was actually, on the last day of the conference, I attended the hotel just to gather up the supplies that were left over and to properly dispose of the sharp containers that were there over the course of the few days. And the hotel staff were great. They thanked me. They were just amazed that we were actually taking all the stuff back and disposing them, and ensuring that our supplies were cared for and taken and disposed of properly. And there was nothing negative that they had to say. And I think they would more than welcome us back with open arms.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I just jump in here quickly? And I hate to jump in on the section for you guys, but I do want to just say something about the hotel. You could only get so many spaces at so many hotels. And the question was, do you put everybody together or do you mix people up at different hotels? What we don't want to do is to set up a situation where it appears to be stigmatizing or you know, oh, let's put all of those people who use drugs together. It happened for a very good reason. One is that we wanted to make sure that people could take care of each other, but it wasn't about, you have to be really careful if you're putting on a conference that you're not setting up this idea that there are, if you will, two classes of different attendees. That was not the intent at all. We knew that we needed to have lots of people who cared for each other and had eyes on, and that was probably the best way to do it. So knowing that actually that hotel ended up being a little bit further away, so then we had a shuttle that went around and would help people get to the actual venue, partly because people didn't know the city, but you know, it just sort of made sense to do things that way. So I just really wanted to mention that if anyone else is putting on a conference, we did not intend to have different, you know what I mean, first, second class citizens. It was not about that at all. It was really about how can we help people have a level of comfort. And so that was why we did that.
And just on Marlis's note there, it actually worked out really good for us with Kaput, because we actually had our AGM at the hotel, and we actually held it in conference space at the hotel. And so further to Marlis's point, it was something that we chose to do. We chose to all stay at the same hotel so that we could, you know, wake up and have our slippers on and go down and get breakfast and attend conference. And so that was a choice that I think we made as a group.
Yeah, and I think that was that's a good point to highlight. Marlis, and we talked about it for the next stimulus coming up as well. There was great conversation about that, and it was just more or less we were going to say, you know, would you like to stay at the Kaput Hotel where there's an OPS, or would you prefer to stay at another hotel? So it's like not segregating. It's just recognizing that not all people who, you know, use drugs are current drug users. They could be former drug users, and then they should be able to have space as well. And so I think it's you know, well-being for everybody that's there or not. So I look at that as an amazing experience to have the two separate hotels, something that we were carrying forward into the next to ensure that, you know, people didn't feel uncomfortable where they were staying. But thank you for making that point. Okay, so did you want to open it up now, Shay, for everybody, or?
Wonderful. Thank you all. That was an amazing presentation, and thank you. And it's so awesome to have all this documented as well and recorded, and that we can share with others. Before we get into the question period, we're going to do a doodle poll. During the presentation, at one point, there was a mention of funders and evaluation, and similarly with Stimulus Connect, there's a need to do this, these evaluations for funding purposes. So you'll see that there's now a poll going up on the screen. So while that's going up on the screen, what I'm going to do is just announce a few upcoming events related that others might be interested. The first is Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy is having its annual general meeting on November 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern. The Stimulus Webinar 3 around harm reduction will take place on December 8th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, so the same time as this event. And then the Stimulus Connect 8, number 8, harm reductions for people who birth or parent is happening on December 4th. And I believe that's also at the same time, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. That's correct, Shay. So that would be a very interesting one as well. So I see that folks are just completing the poll. And we didn't have questions come into the Q&A during the presentation. I'd encourage folks, if they do want to ask some questions, please use the Q&A option. We did, however, get a raised hand from Michael Nurse, so I am just going to figure out and see if I can make this happen, Michael, to put you on the spot. Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask that question. And I'll just wait and see if I see your microphone going to the unmute. Just giving it another moment. Okay, so Michael, why don't you come and unmute when you are able. One thing I did, we discussed just ever so briefly through some of the questions or through some of the discussion that Natasha, Frank, and Chanel were beginning, and we might just expand or ask some of the panelists to expand a little bit on some of the ways that we can ensure the diversity and inclusion of women, gender non-conforming, and other people who use drugs in the decision-making space. Shay, if I can put that one over to you. This is maybe thinking forward to a stimulus 2022. Over to you, Shay.
First, I want to say, let's do stimulus 2021. So did you okay with that? Can we just figure that out? We'll do virtual and online. You know what, Patrick? I've been thinking just on this question. I actually think as a white cisgender woman who's been working in harm reduction and living off of harm reduction for 25 plus years, who has never really used drugs, that I'm the wrong fucking person to answer that question. So I might hand off to anybody else who has some level of diversity in their background, because I'm just the weird event planner.
Can I just jump in really quickly, Shay, in that, and I think it sort of speaks to your point early on, which is having people in harm reduction rather than conference planners take the lead, because, if people truly live harm reduction, then they are going to make every effort to make sure that that happens if they happen to be in the position that they're organizing it. When you have people who are not familiar with with the whole topic area, then it's even harder, I think. Certainly we didn't do it perfectly, but I do think that it does help if you have really on the ground folks there to make sure and to hold people's feet to the fire to make sure that that happens.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shay and Marlisa. Natasha, Frank, Chanel, would either of, I know you started speaking about that a little bit, kind of looking forward to hopefully a 2021. Are there any strategies or ideas? And Frank, I'll pass it over to you.
I don't. What I like to see, personally, I would like to be part of the panel, because I believe there is some. I have some good ideas which I believe I can bring forward. To change the whole dynamics and have a better stimulus next year, plus moving forward. As I mentioned, we need more people of color on your panel. It's a very white panel. So when we just talking to white people only. And that is, to me, I do have a struggle with it. I do struggle with it because, white is, I'm always have to be educating the white man or the white woman. So, we need more people of the color and the diversity on your panel. That's why I mentioned you need more grassroots speakers as opposed to the professionals. I don't want to repeat myself again, but I've been saying this for many, many years. Not today is the first time I'm saying it. It comes like a recurring decimal. I'm seeing it all the time. I'm not seeing the changes. When will the change come? So, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you there, Frank. And you and I have had these conversations many times, not just specific to stimulus, but I mean, just in general, that it's unfair that you constantly have to say that we need to have more equitable representation of people of color. And I agree with that. And I would say as well, I would invite you to bring those proposals forward, and love to have you come in on the executive committee with myself, if Donald and Shay, I'm sure, won't mind at all, and Julie Soleil. because we need your insights, and we are lacking in that, and I recognize that. Chanel, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I would just say for moving forward for folks who are looking at having more meaningful inclusion at their conferences. So some of the ways that you could ensure more meaningful inclusion would be to, if you're not yet connected to, like Frank was stating, you know, the grassroots organizations with the people who have boots on the ground who are doing the work, I would strongly suggest you familiarize yourself and get in touch with those organizations, even if it's you know, in a volunteer capacity, or just as, you know, an observer, somebody who's there willing to learn, you know, what can I do to be an ally to these, to you in your community, and your, for us, you know, we've had great partnerships here. Aware is partnered with, we've had great connections to other groups, you know, Mom Stop the Harm, the True Project, Edmonton's Men's Health Collective. And it's because I think because we're all doing the same line of work, we already all are connected. But I would just say for anybody who's looking to host a conference and have meaningful inclusion, to please do connect with the grassroots organizations that Frank suggested in your community, and get to know, you know, who's around, who's doing what, because you'll find that people are doing important work all across this country, and we're all kind of in our own little pockets. And really it is, you know, previously, as Marla stated, it's about keeping people safer and healthier and alive, and helping ensure that people have the skills, knowledge, resources, and supports that they need to be able to do so. And so, yeah, if you're not yet familiarized with the grassroots organizations in your community, please do take the time to learn up on those.
And can I add something also, because we were gonna have a stimulus in 2020 in Gatineau, and I was the one coordinating here in Quebec, and we had a really awesome group of people that we put together, all grassroots, all people from Gatineau and from Quebec, from all different types of organizations, that were gonna really set up the OPS and all the safe spaces and all those different things. So we learned from the first experience that we needed to include way more people, and we started to really link up with all the different groups, and not just groups of people who use drugs, but also the LGBT plus community and the indigenous communities there, and everybody else that was working with black communities or people of color and all that, and getting all of those people working together, which is not obvious either, because a lot of the times we don't work, all of us, together in the same spaces. So you have to make time to know who those other organizations or people are, and just connect with them and get to know them and see what the commonalities between the different groups is, and work towards those things, because drug policy and everything that we do, harm reduction, does affect all types of people and things like that. So I think we would have had a really cool, much more diverse community there. And I'm sure in 2021, we'll try wherever it will be, and we'll continue doing that. So Frank, I always appreciate you bringing this back here. And it would be nice also to be able to go and reach out to those different communities, to bring them here to the table and discuss these things further.
Thank you.
Not to mention that I would love to offload some of this to you. You can just like, come on right in and help me out, because I need as much help as I can get, so please.
I love you, Natasha.
I love you too, Frank.
Wonderful, thanks. Thanks everyone. Another question that came in at the time of registration was, and you know, we heard about how this conference really did so many things so well. Interesting question that got posed at time of registration was, even if the dynamic of an event is inclusive and effectively integrates people who use substances, how can we account for external forces that may inhibit someone's participation? For example, prohibition on flying with needles or substances, or not having government ID. Any thoughts from any of the panelists? Natasha, if you want to jump in there.
I think I said this in our meeting last night. So yes, like if people don't have ID, did you know they can get a fishing ID and they can fly with a fishing ID, with a fishing license? Found that out through all of our travels with Kaput. And it only costs a few dollars, and it is a recognized ID that people can fly with. So because sometimes when people need government ID, you need ID to get government ID. But with a fishing license, you can just go in with a birth certificate or whatever, like, and they'll give it to you. And then you can actually get on Air Canada or any other flight as that as being your piece of ID. So flying with needles. So I think all of us came from across the country. I brought naloxone with me, and I didn't get stopped going through, you know, the airport at all. And another thing is stimulus was really on. They had needles there, they had naloxone there, they had, you know, supplies that were there that we could take back to the hotel. And that's something generally that we do. Like if we go to Ottawa, for example, we have an individual, one of our board members will go around to the harm reduction organizations and load up on all the stuff that they need and then bring it back to the hotel. So I don't know that you necessarily need to fly with a bunch of harm reduction supplies, but it's always safe to bring your own naloxone in case there isn't some there and backup stuff. But I would say outsource to the harm reduction organizations while you're there, because there's needle exchanges in every community that people can just pop into.
I also was tracking this conversation. And so as people were traveling to other things domestically in Canada, I actually had conversations of, did you take this? Did you have any problems? Were you on WestJet? Were you on Air Canada? And I had seen nobody having these problems. We weren't expecting any. And as far as I know, nobody did. It would be one of those things where sometimes you would want that in your check luggage and maybe not in your handbag, but some logic there. But as far as we know, and then Marlis, did you want to speak what we've done in the past around ID? I know from a fishing license perspective, we would have, the scholarship folks, Tia and Ashley would have paid for that fishing license to make sure that people had the ID. Go ahead, Marlis.
You know, this is in our past Alberta conferences that we had. Boyle Street has an ID department to help people get and store their ID if they want. And so there was a machine that made, you know, it's not government issued, but it's kind of official looking, but it has your picture and your name on it. We had it actually situated right at the hotel for other conferences. And that was so that, because the hotel often demands ID, and that's one that we've tried to get around over and over and over again, and it's just been really tough. So if we couldn't get people to have their ID, then we brought their ID to them, and we're able to do that, and that satisfied the hotel, which was a good thing. I think it's sort of thinking outside the box and trying to be creative, but you know, until massive system change happens, I think it's going to be an ongoing issue.
And just picking up on that, talk about a systems change, there was another question that came in with the registrations. How can we begin to hold decision makers as well as civil society accountable for ensuring meaningful community involvement? And putting it out there, I'm wondering, Chanel, if I could put you on the spot, just to any suggestions that you might have in and around how can we, you know, as we look to funders, policymakers, what are some ways that we can ask them to fund this and hold them to account to ensure that they do?
So in regards to funding, like a Stimulus Connect conference?
Yeah, and I think also ensuring, like, all these strategies that we've heard about, you know, there's certainly a cost to them, and you know, we hear the benefit, and how do we ensure that you know, conferences nationally, or I think we've been hearing that this is really a best practice here, and you know, how do we try and get some of the decision makers to say, yeah, this needs to be a part of your conference planning, and getting those funding bodies to make this a requirement in some of the calls for proposals they might do.
Right. So I think it's become almost evidentiary that you know, we are in a time in Canada and really across the world when we have seen exponentially large numbers of loss of life of folks, and these are, you know, these are folks who are our brothers and sisters, who are our neighbors, who are our friends and family and loved ones. When we consider and take into consideration everybody that we've lost, I think this should be, like Marlis and Shay have previously stated, that should be like the lowest bar possible, and that's keeping people safe and healthy and alive. I think that this would be moving forward, it should be implemented in almost any conference that is hoping to have meaningful inclusion of folks, is ensuring that there's naloxone, that there is an OPS, that safe supply potentially could be available. I think that these are just kind of the standard bare minimums right now when we talk about, in terms to the current context of what's the reality on the ground is across North America when it comes to fentanyl poisoning. Like we heard earlier, Chloe state for the Anchors drug checking that, we had various samples tested. People thought that they were using heroin when in fact, almost every sample, people were actually using fentanyl. And so it kind of goes back to, what Natasha was saying earlier about if people, are intending to take one substance and then ended up getting something totally different. Yeah, it does have a drastic effect. And really in the context of a national overdose crisis happening across Canada, simultaneously, besides having, other crises happening at the same time, with COVID and STI, BBPs. But really, I think this is the lowest standard that we could have for people if they're willing and able to have meaningful inclusion of people at their conference, is to enact some of the measures that we've seen here, because really it is about keeping people safer, healthier, and alive, and really nobody's ideology should take precedent over somebody's life and life choices. And so really just encouraging folks who are looking at implementing conferences or looking at, the like you said, the policymakers, the funders, these should just be right now in this context, until Canada secures a safe supply for all Canadians, these should be the bare minimum standards that should be happening at all conferences, because, like we sit here and we had spoken, in honor of Rafi. I mean, this is something that needs to be implemented wholeheartedly across the country. And I know I can see my Kapud cohorts nodding, but because we know this to be true, because we live this. And so the reality is, I don't know what is the deciding factor to help, the people in power make these decisions, but you could sure send them our way, and we can get Natasha and Frank and sit down and have a conversation with them about the importance of keeping people safer and healthier and alive, I think.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
If I can jump in, I mean, I think that, as long as we politicize this issue, it's not going to change. Different governments can come, if you're going to politicize drug use, then depending on the government of the day, things will not change, and in fact may even get worse. We were really lucky at Stimulus. We were able to have all levels of government see the need and the importance of this and to work towards it. But that's not always the case, and it may not always be the case in the future, depending on, say, who's in the federal government. It's about what we have right now in this country is a small and courageous group of people who use drugs that are willing to put themselves out there and to speak. But there are not enough people joining them. And that is people not admitting their own personal drug use, people who are allies, people who, all of that. As long as we keep the people who would say be able to belong to Kapud separate, we're not going to see any change. This has to be about us. It can't be about separating people out one way or the other.
Well, I don't know what else we can do. We have done demonstrations. We have done protests. We stood up at conferences and we hold placards and everything else. We have given them all the data. We have given them all the information. And yet still, the hardest thing for us to do is to get all levels of government on board. So whereas, they can recognize the work we are doing and give us more funding.
Yeah, and I think these are all really great points. And I strongly believe that anybody this should be the lowest standard, like Stimulus 18 should be the lowest minimum standard of where anybody goes. And how do you do that? You ensure that you hire people who use drugs to actually do the conference. It's done backwards. were brought in after the fact, and we know what drug use is like. We know what happens to drug users when they go out of their immediate area and use drugs elsewhere, the problems that people face when they meet up in a new city. We have a mechanism that's built in already of trust with our people. And so for me, it's like the system is turned upside down. It's backwards. It's professionals leading everything, and then we get brought down at the bottom of the pyramid. Like when really it should be we are at the top of the pyramid, and then all those other pieces come down. And so I just want to kind of speak to the best practices research that as well that Kaput and CDPAC is doing. So when we first started talking about, stimulus 2020 at the time, COVID sucks again. I can't say that enough, but anyway, I felt like we were trailblazers, and we were like off to Gatineau, and we were laying all the groundwork. And I remember in Shay's hotel room the first night that we were there, and I was like, Shay, we need to do a best practices document for people who use drugs, but just not in conference planning. I mean, in workforce, in equitable pay, job security, all of those pieces that are missed, because a lot of times the work that we do is precarious, or it's disposable at any given time, right? And so, and I think it goes back to sort of the funding model too. It's like flipping funding models upside down and started working from a different way. So we started this best practices because we had identified that there was many gaps in literature, and the literature that does exist, or recommendations for best practices of people who use drugs, are not written by us. They're not by us or for us. So they're like other people's interpretation of what they think is best practices for people who use drugs. And so, yeah, we're getting the groundwork done. We have people hired, and we have that in progress. And so part A is around employment practices for people who use drugs in the harm reduction sector, and ensuring that we're involving people who use drugs in work and making it less discriminatory. Also around living wage, pay, honoraria, job recognition, and equity, and also benefits. The second piece to that is, because stimulus was kick-ass, I said we have to make sure that we include, like, how do you have a great kick-ass conference again, and what are the bare minimum things that you need? But I don't even think it's bare minimum. I think we're taking lessons learned from last, and we're saying this is how it needs to be moving forward. These are the pieces that we need in place. And so that's all about having people use drugs leading and being meaningfully included in all facets of the conference. Right down from the top of the leadership down to the local community level, because we had, as Julie Soleil spoke to, was the local community group helping us figure out what the drug supply is on the ground, looking at ways to make sure that people have access to certain types of drugs and have safety mechanisms built in place. So yeah, I was just giving a little shout out to the research we're doing, or practice, or like project we're doing, I guess I should say, because it's really about consulting people all across this country about their current experiences, and then learning from that and making recommendations moving forward. And this will be like in our voices, because it's led by us, it's ours, and it'll be by us and for us. And so we'll put that on blast when it's done and share it with everybody. But yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to go on a little bragging spree there, Patrick, but I'm pretty proud of the work we're doing.
And as you should be, I think, as you should be. We're coming up to the end of our time, and we wanted to share back some of these, the sharing poll, the results from the poll that we did. So folks can scroll down and see just some of the results that we had. And again, these are things that we need to do for the funder. So folks can have a look at that. And while folks are having a look at that, I might just ask our panelists, just if folks feel, if there's something that hasn't been said and they just want a quick last word, I'll just go do a quick kind of round the table. Frank, any final thoughts, last words from your perspective?
My final words, I didn't think about anything actually, but what I can say, I hope everything goes differently from now on.
I love it. Okay, thank you, Frank. And Hannah, got you on screen. Any final parting words?
Well, I work in research, and so a lot of governments and policymakers, they only listen to data, and I know that's not what's the most important, but sometimes you just gotta go with the system. So I encourage people as much as possible to publish, participate in research, and sometimes you just have to kind of use their language to make change. And yeah, so just, I know Arthur's done a great job. He worked with us on our paper, and yeah, it's amazing work. Now the whole world has been able to read about it, so.
Wonderful, thank you, Hannah. And over to you, Arthur, any final words?
Yeah, just kind of piggyback off what Hannah said, like that's also very important. And I think, again, to go back to the actual Overdose convention set that was at the conference, like I think that should be something that's implemented everywhere if people are able to do it in their provinces. For upcoming conferences and such, I know it was very beneficial to us, and it's kind of, like I said, it was the first one, so we weren't really sure how to go about it 100%, but I mean, I think we did great, and it can only get better from here. So, yeah.
Right on. Thank you, Arthur. And over to you, Marlies.
No, I don't actually have a lot to add. It was an honor to be able to do this conference, and to, you don't do that without getting a whole lot of education in ways you can do better. And so it's staying open to those ideas and really striving to improve things. I think we all are frustrated that the world isn't a different place than it is, but maybe events like this can help make small changes. And I guess that's why it's important that we continue to do that, and that we continue to connect and hear all voices.
Thank you, Marlies. Julie?
Well, one thing I can say is that after Stimulus 2018, Chrism and the gang from the Quebec Eastern, they decided to, in a conference on hepatitis C, bring together a safe place and do a little bit and act on that. And then I was on another one on AOTs. And so it was starting in other conferences. What Stimulus 2018 did, a lot of other conferences were thinking about that. And I was on board on 3 or other committees here in Quebec that were really thinking about doing the same thing. So I think one thing you have to say, yes, there's always lessons learned, but there are other people that will be picking it up. And I hopefully a lot of other conferences across Canada that ask people who use substances or people from the ground to be there and open and bring those services there. So I think there is little babies a little bit everywhere. I don't know how to say that in English, but there are people picking it up. And I think with all the people that were here today, hopefully it will also get better. And thank you, Hannah, for publishing something like that, because for sure, and all the people who worked with that, because I think you're right. Sometimes research does help, but also all the stuff that you guys do, all of you, I love you all, and you're all awesome, and continue your amazing work.
Thank you, Julie. Over to you, Chloe, just a short final word.
Yeah, I have to say it was the best conference I've ever been to. And sometimes when you go to a conference that good and then you go to other ones, it's very disappointing. So I'm hoping there's a lot of learning from everywhere that Stimulus. I really feel like thankful and grateful for the group of people that put Stimulus on, and the invite to be there and to be part of that groundbreaking experience. And I think when it comes to drug checking, the relationship with people who use drugs and being someone who uses drugs really does help to have a service work. And being able to connect with folks who are going and buying supplies for people and then checking their drugs was how that worked out. So just to put that in there, that you can't just set up a service and expect everybody to come unless you have that relationship. And I feel like Stimulus did a great job with that. So thank you very much. And I can't wait until we can get back together again.
Over to you, Chanel, for a final quick word.
Yeah, so just, I guess, definitely looking forward to the next Stimulus conference, wherever it may be, whenever it may be, and really just encouraging, everyone, be safe and take care of yourselves and each other. And yeah, I hope to see you all at the next Stimulus Connect conference.
Wonderful, Chanel. And Shay, over to you.
I absolutely continue to be honored and to hear that everybody wants another conference. You need to know that we've spent the last COVID land here, almost 8 months, trying to figure out how to do that. What we've become very clear about is that stimulus on a computer is not the same. And in fact, without people in the room, it isn't the same. And until we can find a province that we can travel to and that people can leave every province to get to it, we will have to do online pieces. And you need to know, I know that the limitations of technology and Wi-Fi and power means there's a heck of a lot of people who can't join us today. And I can't figure out a way through that. So I'll leave it with that. But thank you for all your kind words and for the additional recommendations on how to do this better, because I need to hear that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shay. And very last word over to you, Natasha. Just to you.
So, yeah, I think what everybody said has been amazing. I think this goes back to like actually normalizing conversations around drug use and normalizing drug use itself, right? And I think stimulus does that well. There's no othering involved here. It's about making sure everybody has equity, making sure that we have people who use drugs leading as we should. And for me, like, I can't wait until we can meet again, because as Shay said, technology only goes so far. And a lot of our people just don't have access to because of other life circumstances. And I think, like, so we can keep doing the online formats in the meantime, but I think the goal is for us to aim towards having another stimulus where we can all be together, where we can hug each other, when we can hang together, when we can care for each other again. And I know what's going to happen. When is the question, but I'm thankful for all of these people that are here today that have done such a kick-ass job at it. And I am just very thankful for them including us as main stakeholders in this, as I believe we should. And I'm proud that Stimulus 2018 and Stimulus 2020 also upholds that and embodies that. And yeah, thank you, everybody. It's been an amazing talk today. And I hope people in the audience learned from this. And if you have any questions, shoot us a text or an email and we'll get back to you.
Absolutely. Well, and I just want to thank all the panelists. Thank you to everyone for joining and speaking today, and thank you for everyone who joined us today. As mentioned, this has been recorded, and we'll be sharing that recording. Shay will also be sending out an evaluation form, so have a look for that. And certainly want to thank Sophie for all her work in doing the closed captioning. Yes, thanks to all. And also just want to help other folks who've helped behind the scenes, such as Elaine Hishka and other folks from the Stimulus National Implementation and Planning Committee. Thank you for allowing me to moderate. And with that, we'll close today. So thanks to all.
And I'm going to turn stuff off if the panelists can stay. If you all can stay, that would be great. Thanks. All right.